a due date that was screwed up, not only will I fix it, but like I said, no one will, and I'll give you time to do the assignment, and I won't penalize you if it was my bad for the due date. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So again, just not only highlighting what we're going to do over the next couple of weeks, but every week I like to kind of remind you of kind of the arc of the course. So we started out with the last week with the introduction, and in particular with the last several minutes on strategy. By the way, I found a slide today from another source that talks about the financial model that is the best one I've ever seen on one page, a graphic, and I will share that with you. I'll put it in an announcement, and I'll use it in a subsequent live class period. So tonight we're going to talk about trends and challenges, everything from AI to work from home and the return to work, and some of the stuff that's going on, some of the stuff that's ahead of us still. AI being probably at the top of that list, and the legal context. So we're not going to get into the weeds here, and there's a ton of state and federal regulations and laws in the HR sphere. You don't need to know what they all are if you're not working in HR. But you do need to know some of the big ones. Okay? So as a manager, as a hiring manager in particular, you need to at least have general awareness of what's kosher, what's not, and what some of the requirements are. So you need to, and I'm going to cover it kind of at that level. I'm not going to get down into the weeds with some of the stuff and some of the laws. I'm not going to touch on it all, which is not to suggest that they're not important. But the folks in your respective HR shops are the ones who are worried about that and making certain they're compliant and dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So you just need to know about it on a big picture perspective. Okay, and then we'll get into. Next week, well, what would have been next week, we'll also get into work design. So talking about macro to micro. So macro meaning how do we think about how the organization is designed and structured, and then working our way down to individual jobs. And so you've all seen probably job descriptions. You probably have one. Hopefully you do. You've seen job specs, like in job postings and so forth, which is not exactly the same thing, but they're certainly related. But it's a really kind of an unsung cornerstone of defining roles, so that as we go down the road here and talk more about this, as we talk about talent acquisition and recruiting, how do we recruit for something unless we first and foremost define it? As we talk about talent management and human capital development, so as we talk about how do we look at the broader organization, what skills and competencies do we have, which ones are we short on, how do we close those gaps? How do we go through the development process? So it's a cornerstone in that. Moving a little bit further on with respect to performance management. So how do we assess performance, whether someone is doing well or not doing so well? How do we look at their development path, their career path, and design IDPs, individual development plans to move folks there? And let's say each of these, so if you're going from accountant 1 to accountant 2 to accountant 3, what's the difference between those, other than maybe a year or two of experience? So what kinds of skills and competencies and so forth do you need to know in the next job and the next one and the next one? And how do we put together a plan to help you gather those skills and competencies to move up the ladder? Okay. So that was week 6. And then week 7, module 7, again, coming back to total rewards, which is compensation and benefits and rewards, all three of those. So with respect to, what does your job pay? How much does it pay? What's the split between base and some kind of incentive or some kind of equity, especially if you're in a management role? How do we determine what that market rate is on a company's pay? And again, you can't do that unless first and foremost you define the role. So what you call accountant 1, my company calls junior accountant or something like that. So we have to sort through that stuff. And again, that's why this issue of work design and job analysis is a critical kind of component, a building block as we go forward. And then lastly, on week 8, we'll talk about international HR. And I think I already mentioned I've gotten confirmation from the protagonist, the heroine of the case study, that was hired to help develop a brand new port in the Middle East. And so Meg Huber is going to be with us and answer questions.
Whoa.
We'll have a live kind of case study synchronously in class. So again, that's the part of the class. Okay, I'm going to take a real short, when I say break here, I just want to see if who's still listening. Let's see. Daniel, are you with us yet? Okay. And Samuel. I think I got the other couple of folks that came in a couple minutes later. Okay, moving on here. All right, so the slides are going to reference a couple of case studies, including these two, and the Burt's Bees case. We may not have time to do what I would prefer to do, or what I would normally do if we had a full 8 weeks, but because tonight's session is crammed, we may not have time to get into those like I'd hoped. But let's talk about for a minute the Costco's case study. And there were two readings, both pretty short. I can't remember the specific titles of them, but one of them I think was said the high cost of something or other. I can't remember.
Low wages?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Anyone want to take a crack at that? And in particular, well, let me ask the question first. Is there anybody who's not been in a Costco? Seriously, I mean, does anybody not understand what their business model is and how they work and so forth? And I presume that the response would be the same about a Sam's Club, right? So everybody's been in the Sam's Club, knows what it is. Okay. It's owned by the Walmart Corporation, and it's basically the Walmart version of Costco. Okay. So anyone want to take a crack at this? And after reading the two articles, and there's a couple of key points that I'm looking for here, but anyone want to take a crack at this? And anyone who's shopped in both stores and want to share their experience about why you would shop in one versus the other?
Huh.
This is the audience participation portion.
Professor.
Gene, and then Jonathan.
I like to go to Costco regularly for my work. I do not like Costco, but I can see the whole. It's nice to have everything right there. You can walk in. Most of the Costco's are the same. I go to the business center, but I mean, you can just tell like the employees are very polite. Like they enjoy their job. Like I go to Ralph's and they're complaining all the time, but Costco, no, they're quite happy. So they must have good benefits. From the reading, they have good benefits. They have good medical. They have low employee turnover. So I can see what people want to work there.
Okay, Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm actually a member at both Costco and Sam's Club. Really what kind of drives me to go shop at these places is just, be able to reap the benefits of the purchasing in bulk, right? So there is that upfront cost of, the membership, but it gives you access to being able to kind of purchase these products in bulk and, in the long run, perhaps save yourself a little bit of money throughout the whole year that you have that membership. The one difference that I do see between Costco and Sam's Club, just kind of an observation here, and they brought it up in the case, was Costco does tend to be kind of a little bit more premium. So their prices are a little bit higher, but you do probably get a little bit, bigger value or, better brands versus the Sam's Club portion. They come in smaller bulk sizes, and, it's a little bit more economic. So kind of, comparison there.
Right, good. By the way, for those, and I'll get to you here in just a second, for those still in the queue here, think a little bit more narrowly around the, in IT speak, UI, UX, those acronyms mean anything to anybody? User interface, user experience. So those are marketing / IT terms. So think about your UI, UX experience at either of the two retailers, and in particular, your interaction with the staff. So whether that's people on the floor or the cashiers or the special order desk or wherever else you're going. Okay, Caitlin?
Yeah, so I've had experiences with both Costco and with Sam's Club. As for the UI UX experience for most things that I need at Costco, it's all the way at the end, at the bakery. If I need milk, if I need vegetables, all at the end. Also, with going to check out, that's where the food court is, and you can't pass up on the 100 or the $1.50 hot dog. I think what the UI UX does better in Sam's Club is that they actually have a hands-free checkout where you just put the items in the cart and you can just check out by walking out. I believe it's through the app or different things like that that my mom was showing me, which I thought was cool and something that maybe in the future another company might implement. But as of now, I do like Costco better just because it's closer to me and a little bit more convenient for myself.
Okay. William?
Apologies, I found a week there. So just to kind of add to the knowledge of what Jonathan was saying with like the low price and low strategy, and just to kind of reference the textbook, it did describe a strategy called cost control. And that's how I believe Costco is implemented, by just keeping its costs low. And from the reading, it says that they will generate the profit from the membership fees. And the one thing, and I was going to additionally say, what was previously said already was like this, the checkout procedure. It is true that Costco doesn't have a self-checkout feature, Sam Clubs does. But from the reading, Costco wants to implement that because they feel that keeping the person at the checkout is better, more quicker customer service with getting everybody out. So I just think that's one thing that really could separate Costco from Sam's Club.
By the way, just a quick aside, two things. I think it was Amazon Fresh. This is something I read probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, but a couple of large retailers that went in big time with self-checkout are now rolling that back. And even my local Walmart Supercenter, they put in a whole bunch of checkout self-check stations, and then about 3 months later, they took them out and put regular check stands back in. So I don't know the reason what happened there, but that was kind of an interesting development. The second point, completely unrelated to the first, Costco has an interesting cost model. They have a standard 15% markup. So whatever their purchase price is on their stuff, they mark it at 15%, and that's their pricing strategy. So which is very atypical in standard retail. So in like retail clothing, there's what they call keystone pricing. So if you were to buy clothing, if it's let's say it's a sport jacket that's $200. At Keystone pricing, their cost was $100. So it's a 100% markup. So just two different kind of product lines with a very, very different, and two different retailers, very, very different kind of markup strategy. Okay, I want to move on, and I want to do this kind of quickly because I want to make the point here and move on. Jennifer?
Yeah, what I was going to say is I don't have experience with Sam's Club, but with Costco, even the case study mentioned it, that in return for their generosity, like generous wages and benefits packages, they do have the most loyal workers. And from what I've noticed, like at least the past 5 years, it's been the same employees, and they don't get tired of what they're doing, and they provide practically the best customer service I've seen from like a retailer store.
Okay. Keyword there, loyal. Somebody else a couple minutes ago mentioned turnover, so keep those terms in mind. We're going to come back to this. Alexa?
Yeah, I was just going to say I don't really have any experience with Sam's Club. I've only shopped at Costco, but I think they do position themselves very well for customer convenience. They have an auto shop, their whole grocery store, and then gas. So if someone's shopping and then they need to get gas, they're tired from work, they're not going to go to another gas station if they have it right there, and vice versa. And at the Costco's that I've been going to lately, I have seen a self-checkout, so I do think that's a new implementation. And as for the membership fee, I feel like people don't really think about it that much anymore. It's just an auto renewal because you're still going to shop there either way.
I'm going to take one more comment, and for those, I'm going to skip some, but you'll have plenty of opportunity tonight to weigh back in. So last one, Dina.
Yeah, I also don't, because of location, geographical. I don't have experience with Sam's Club, but with Costco, the excellent customer service is also in part attributed to the fact that Costco provides like stocks to employees, and so then it's in the employees' like best interest to make that stock price grow, and they do that by being exceptional to customers. So it's pretty interesting the way that the employees themselves make it grow and then get more profit.
Here's the punchline, and here's what I want you to pay attention to. So let me ask you a question first. So who do you think? Who wants to take a swack at explaining the difference between unit labor cost versus total labor cost? Anybody with a finance and accounting, FP&A background want to take a run at that? Scott?
I was raising my hand for the.
Oh, the other one. Okay. Who wants to, put your hands down unless you want to take a run at my question that's on the table about total labor cost versus unit cost. Caitlin? No. Okay. Jonathan?
Yeah, unit labor costs, you're probably looking at the hourly rates of your employees and just kind of, strictly looking at that on a per unit basis, how many hours they're kind of, clocking in, clocking out on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. Total labor costs then, kind of takes into account the fringe and overhead benefits is kind of, from my experience in finance, how you, kind of capture all that total labor costs.
Okay.
Everything that comes with the benefits and, the PTO, all that stuff. Yeah.
Pretty close. Kylie?
I was just going to say that the total labor cost doesn't consider output, whereas the unit labor cost is very focused on output. And so the unit labor cost is focused on productivity.
Okay. Good observation. Not the total income looking for. One more slack. Jennifer and then Dina.
Well, I think that where I didn't hear some of my classmates for the total product cost, it involves the material costs and the labor, so everything, all the expenses in producing that product, whereas unit labor is just for labor for that one unit.
Okay. One last go. Dina, do you have your?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a simple stab at it is that, like, as the name dictates, so unit cost is like the what like a single unit takes to produce, and then total encompasses all the different aspects that I think it was Jonathan mentioned.
Yeah, you're all of you are warm, but you haven't quite zeroed in. Let me help you out here. Okay, now think about the two organizations and contrast. And for the purpose of this argument, think about just the base rate of pay. Which one of the two organizations pays a higher hourly rate, base rate?
Costco,
Costco. Okay, and by how much?
like $8.
It was pretty considerable, right?
72%.
Yeah. So think back to the discussion we had at the tail end of last week's session when we were talking about business strategies and how the HR strategy needs to align. And I mentioned Walmart being a low-cost leader. So they're looking at how do I acquire products at the lowest cost? How do I get the most efficiency in my supply chain, my inventory control, my labor cost? Okay. Those are among the elements that we need to do to keep our costs as low as possible so we can keep our prices as low as possible. Okay. So in that vein, Walmart's approach is, well, we want the lowest possible labor cost. So not only will we have a lower labor rate, but we'll also have probably a higher percentage of part-timers versus full-timers because we don't have to pay the part-timers benefits. Okay. So the unit labor cost at Sam's Club is significantly lower than Costco. So if that's the only data that you'd looked at, you'd say, well, Walmart's a lot smarter at this, and with respect to keeping their costs low. That would be a reasonable presumption based upon just that data point. What it ignores, however, is the total labor cost, which includes, as several of you had mentioned, other stuff like benefits, health insurance and retirement plans and so forth, okay? But what it also includes is productivity, to the point that I think Kylie made, okay? And if you take a look at inputs, outputs, how many labor hours per dollar sold? That's one way to look at it. There are other ways to do it as well, okay? And Costco beats the socks off of Walmart with respect to their productivity. So if you take a look at the sales in a Costco per labor hour versus the sales in a Walmart per labor hour, Costco has it all over the place. Now there's another element, here's a hint, loyalty, turnover. What else do you think is contributing to total labor cost and why Costco's got the better model? Roxy?
Sorry, my hand was up just for the total cost and unit cost.
Okay, all right. Let me go to a couple of new voices here. Laura.
Somewhere in there, could you repeat the question?
Okay. All things considered, what else do you think goes into the total labor cost and why Costco would have an advantage, a productivity advantage over Walmart?
They would have to do less recruiting, less hiring people.
Okay, you're getting warm. Who else? Scott?
I was going to say they don't have to keep training people because when there's a high turnover rate, it's going to cost a lot more to train.
Bingo. Now, let me talk about that for a second, okay? So if you're thinking total labor cost, it's not just the unit cost per dollars per hour. It's not just the benefits costs, okay? It also includes the cost of turnover, okay? I touched on this last week. Turnover is really expensive. There's a lot of empirical data out there, a lot of studies around this. And although the results varied a little bit, generally speaking, the studies are showing that every time you turn over a role, it's anywhere between 0.5 to 1.5 times the person's annual salary. So even at a $15 an hour minimum wage job, that's about 30K, okay, slightly more than 30K. At 0.5, that's costing you $15,000 every time you turn that position over. So that's out-of-pocket costs, that's job postings, that's recruiter costs, that's manager interview costs, okay? That's soft dollar costs of overtime that, of other people that are doing that work while the position is vacant. That considers the time that as someone is brand new to the job, they're very unproductive for the first few months until they kind of learn their job and come up on the productivity curve, okay? Their effectiveness, their productivity is much, much lower. So all of those things are factoring in. Now, also think, if you're looking at a $15 a job, $15 an hour job or employer versus a 22 or 25, whatever the number was in the case, I don't remember, okay. Which of those two wage rates are going to attract probably a better class of candidates?
Obviously, the higher paying.
Exactly. Okay. So Costco, by paying more, by treating people better, is attracting a significantly better workforce, more qualified workforce, more loyal workforce, and they're having much less turnover, much less churn. So because their turnover is much lower, the costs associated with that turnover are much lower, and their productivity is much higher. So the point being, focus on total labor cost, not the unit cost. And too many businesses are too short-sighted and they don't see the difference. I think I said last week, there's an old expression, I wish I'd coined this phrase, there are way too many bean counters that know the cost of everything but the value of nothing. Okay, and if you think about what's the value in having a more engaged employee? What's the value of having a more capable, more experienced employee? What's the value in having lower turnover? What's the value in having not only more employee engagement, but more loyalty to the company? What's the value in having a much lower turnover cost? Okay. Now, some of those things are, like I said, easily quantifiable. Some not so much. Some are hard dollar savings. Some are soft dollar savings. But the idea being here, and what I wanted to focus on, the reason why I wanted to have this conversation at all about this cost study, is that as you're looking at the cost of labor, look at it much more holistically, including but not limited to the cost of turnover in particular. Okay. Follow-on questions or comments about that?
Yeah, Professor, so one of the other benefits that kind of came with the employee loyalty, as you're describing here, is, and might be kind of hard to connect it to total labor costs, but I mean shrinkage reduction, right? They were talking about how more loyal employees were more, kind of led to less losses of product and inventory at Costco, which ultimately added to the bottom line. And so I thought that was also a very interesting, point that they highlighted there.
Okay. By the way, in the retail trade, it's called shrink. And it includes stuff that didn't get received properly, didn't get rung up or charged for properly. It also includes theft. And in the retail industry, don't quote me on this, but I think that the standard is around 3%. So if you have 3% or less shrink, you're kind of an industry average. And the less below 3%, the better you are. Okay. But yes, that's another one of those costs. Okay. Roxy, Scott, and Jeannie, did you have additional comments or questions?
Yeah, especially I wanted to mention that they have a strong company culture because they invest in training and also they promote internally, so they don't have they have less turnover.
Agreed. Yeah, those are all factors also that are also contributing aside from the benefit stuff. Scott?
From my experience, I have friends that work at Costco, and I absolutely see videos of people regarding employees from Costco. They always regard Costco as a career more than just a job. While Walmart and Sam's Club, they focus on part-timers. And so with people who are higher retention rates, I guess, there'll be higher productivity and better company culture.
And Costco also has and I think somebody mentioned it earlier, Costco has a pretty strong promote from within culture. So to the extent that you join kind of at the bottom rung of the ladder, you've got an opportunity to kind of work your way up. Jean and Lauren and Dina, and then we'll move on.
Just one last thing that kind of could resonate with all of us is they have tuition assistance for college, and that's a great benefit as well.
It is. I did not know that, and it is a great benefit. Lauren?
I feel like from reading from the case study, Costco has two critical groups, being the employees and their consumers. So just to like what you said about employee turnover, if they're willing to stay at their job, it just means that they like their job, they're getting promoted well since they promote within. And that way they could provide better customer service to the consumers. So that's how they're still thriving in business.
Yes, good points. And lastly, Dina?
Yeah, I was going to say that because Sam's Club has a higher turnover rate, then they just have more costs associated with recruitment and training. Whereas for Costco, that problem is more minimized.
Yes, correct. So like I said, the lower unit cost is a bit of a red herring. It's not really an indicator of keeping that cost down. Okay. All right. So changing gears here a little bit. This is a quick model. We're not going to spend more than a minute or two on it, but one approach among many is the stakeholder approach, a shareholder approach. So there are three competing objectives, if you will, sometimes in tension with one another. So organizational objectives, and first and foremost, those would be financial, but they might also include, market share and other kinds of things. The employee objectives, everyone wants to rise up in their career path. They want to make more money. They want to have better benefits, all that kind of stuff. And then societal objectives. So what expectations does the society have on the business for being a good corporate steward, for for being environmentally conscious, for being, DEI sensitive, for instance. Okay. So those three things, like I said, sometimes are in tension. And one model says that, HR has the role of kind of balancing those and making certain that all three are met. But one at the top, the organizational objectives, if an organization, any financial organization, any financial enterprise, if they're not making sufficient profits to reinvest in the business and stay in business, they will go out of business. So profit is not a bad thing. Profit is a good thing. Without profit, the business doesn't survive. Now, that's not to say the more the better, and that that it's okay to gouge the public and so forth. I'm not suggesting that, but one of the things that HR needs to support, as I said last week in the first class, they need to be developing strategies and capabilities and tactics and processes and so forth to support the business, to be aligned with the business, to make the business successful. So that's table stakes. Okay. So it's been 5 years now, 2020, since COVID. Doesn't seem like that long, does it? And a lot's changed. That really turned the world upside down and kind of inside out. Okay. And so the sudden, work from home and the things associated with that were just unbelievable, the impact that it had on the business, unemployment rate, and a whole bunch of other things. Okay. So a whole lot of chaos, especially early on. It smoothed out a little bit over time. And so people who were used to going into the office are now working at home. And when you have, it's the photo kind of demonstrates where you've got, two working parents and a young child, all at home, all under each other's foot at the same time. So you got a kid who couldn't go to school, and you got two working parents who stayed at home, and it was just a mess. Fortunately, my kids are grown and out of the house, and so this wasn't an issue for me. But another one, the she session. So the driven primarily by COVID, women left the workforce in much greater proportions, much greater numbers than did men, particularly for those who had young children at home. Okay. So significant impact not only on the economy, but how businesses get work done, how businesses get folks hired and on board. Natasha?
I wanted to point out too, in regards to this section as well, a lot of people took early retirement as well at this time, or a lot of people that were planning to stay with jobs a little bit longer also retired earlier during this time frame when the whole pandemic thing happened, which caused a major issue for the workforce when people did return to the office, because a lot of that experience and knowledge disappeared. It was gone, right? And so there was no one to train the new people that needed to come in and take over these positions. So it hurt a lot of companies badly, and a lot of companies are still hurting because of this very reason alone, where a lot of those skilled and knowledgeable employees exited the workforce at that time.
Well, I shudder to think what's going to happen in the federal government over the next year or two with the early retirements and so forth, and a lot of that experience and skill being removed from the federal workforce. It's going to be chaotic over the next year or two. So we'll independent of your political views, that's just a fact with folks being gone. So when you're making major cuts and headcount cuts to organizations, agencies, it's going to affect the ability of those agencies to fulfill their mission, whatever that is, whether it's the FDA or USAID or Social Security Administration or IRS or wherever it is. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. Jennifer?
Based on, I just know that during COVID, there's, I realized I searched into after the lady said it, but there was a way for like CalPERS for the public sector to buy some years in retirement so that you could retire earlier, but just the fact that it was offered like a catch up where you could purchase those service years. And then with the whole,
Interesting approach. And going back here to the slide here for a second, so you'll notice that August to September and 2020, so that's just a 2-month time frame, 800,000 women left the workforce compared to 216,000 men. Huge disproportionate change. in workforce demographics. And so, never mind the HR function, if you're the head of a business, how do you negotiate some of this stuff? How do you work with your HR person to say, how are we going to replace those skills? Okay. Jonathan?
Yeah, Professor. Just so was there any like particular, aside from the obvious COVID, was there any particular reason why women were more affected than men, out of the study or anything like that?
I'm not familiar with the specific study that's cited here, this Ewing Nelson. My best guess would be because of for the women that had school-age children at home, that's where the big impact was felt. Because if those kids are home because they can't go to school because of COVID, and one of the two parents has to they can't afford childcare, and one of the two parents has to stay home. And like I said, I don't know this for a fact, but that would be my best guess of why it was so disproportionately affecting women versus men. Kylie?
Yeah, I was just gonna touch on what you were saying and then also kind of touch on what Jonathan was saying, but that I'm not surprised that it was more women than men leaving the workforce just because of gender roles in society, men being the provider and women being the one to take care of the house. And during that time, there was so much happening with the schools being shut down. And so I feel like women, at least in my family and the women I saw around me, were kind of expected to take care of the house and the kids and the school and everything at the time.
Yeah, agreed. Caitlin?
Yeah, I just wanted to go also and say with Kylie, like, due to gender roles, there was that childcare burden. Not only that, there was also beyond childcare, there was care for the elderly. So in some cases, you would have to move your family back or take care of the elderly. And in doing so, it wasn't viable for people to work or hire childcare, so it just seemed easier. I know as well as in my family for my mom to decide to stop working and to make sure to take care of my grandparents and her kids.
Yeah, the so-called sandwich generation. Mika?
Oh,
I was
sandwich
just
generation.
going to say what
That sounds
Caitlin
kind of
said.
tasty.
It was just like there's a lot of responsibilities on like the child care, taking care of others, and just school closures in general, because a lot of the kids, they actually went online as well, remotely. So it took a lot of effort, I guess, more so from the women's side to actually sit down and like, especially for the younger kids, like teach them how to sit in front of a computer and just learn somehow through a screen. So I think that was just a whole switch and transition, which they kind of had to more so like participate in.
Yeah. Laura?
I was just going to say yes, that in addition to the traditional gender roles that are still around, it would be to a family's detriment if the woman who is taking care of those things were to get sick. And so I imagine that had to do, like leaving the workplace had to do with them getting sick. If they were to, it would be really bad.
Yeah. Now, again, think about this as though you were the president of the company. You were the owner of the company. So regardless of what gave rise to it, in this case it was COVID, but you have this massive disruption in your workforce. Okay? With either people not being able to come to work, and in some cases, depending upon never mind the, what was the term used at the time? Essential functions or essential something or others, I can't remember. So, and a lot of jobs, I mean, think about most retail jobs, think about construction jobs, think about manufacturing jobs, think about jobs where you have to be at the workplace to perform the work versus the kinds of things that you can do from home. So accounting and payables and all that kind of stuff, you can do remotely. Engineering, you can do remotely. Some sales
No, you
can
can't.
do remotely.
No, you can't.
But think about, you're the head of a business, and the primary function of your business has to be delivered on site. What do you do?
I wish I could have done my job remotely.
And that's a rhetorical question. I don't necessarily have the answer, and it'll be different from case to case. But this is the kind of stuff that as business executives, as business owners, you need to be thinking through and working with your HR team, that what happens, how do I deal with these major significant disruptions in the workforce? Scott and Dina and Jeannie, and then I want to move on.
I think I think one of the reasons why women were able to retire was because some of them were forced into it. Think about the job types that women have. Like they cut hair, they do nails, they do so many services that men don't do. And those were the jobs that were primarily impacted because during COVID, people were not allowed to touch each other. They were not allowed to get within 6 feet. So that was a huge thing. Another thing was the gender wage gap. Sometimes women didn't make enough money, so yeah, it just made more sense to stay at home and raise their kid while their husband worked.
Agreed. Dina?
Yeah, I mean, a little away from the she session and more just like overall since the post-COVID remote work, because I work for a small city here in LA. Most departments and divisions, they all have like the union employees, like the ones represented, are able to do like half remote because I work in recreation services and we're kind of like frontline staff at these facilities, like offering customer service and a whole bunch of like facility management and other things and programming. We're entitled to like absolutely zero remote work, even though we all work for the same organization, just because of the job that like the job specs.
By the way, that's one of the, and I'll, Jeannie and Natasha, and then we'll move on. One of the things to think about with respect to remote work versus Daniel, good to see you. Glad you could join us. Is, how do you determine which jobs are capable of being done remotely versus done on site? And a lot of those earlier presumptions were blown up with COVID because an awful lot of the presumptions about things that had to be done in the office, people, guess what? They found a way to do them at home. And in some cases, they were more productive at home than they were in the office. So it completely broke the long-standing paradigm for at least a lot of jobs with respect to what could be done remotely versus what could be done on site. Jeannie and Natasha, and then I need to move on.
I was just going to say that I work in manufacturing, and I was a part of who chose who was going to work remotely and who was going to have to be there. And it was absolutely true. Like, of course, the whole factory had to be there because they're producing our product, right? And again, in accounting, they were remote or whatever, and shipping had to be there. But it was quite complicated trying to figure out who had to be there and who didn't, because not only do you have to deal with people that their job can be remote, but people who are actually going to work correctly when they're working from home. It became a real issue.
Well, there's not only the skill issue, there's more fundamentally the trust issue. If I can't see you, how do I know you're working?
Oh,
Natasha?
yeah, that's a good point.
I wanted to say in regards to some people working from remote may hate me for saying this, but I personally feel like the working from remote thing was good when we needed it, right? But I think that once COVID and everything was over, they should have completely done away with it, because I feel like it has actually messed up the workforce a great deal. And I say that because, for example, for us, I'm in manufacturing as well. And so right now we have a huge problem finding employees because a lot of people want to work remote, right? But we don't offer anything that is remote. We do have a couple of positions where people have worked remote, like our accounting department. But what we've noticed is our accounting department is slipping, right? They're not working the full 8 hours a day. So we have things like, accounts aren't getting
What are they doing?
collected on and things like that, because these people are working from home and they're doing other things. So I personally feel like those that are able to work from home, they're not necessarily getting their money's worth.
Now, think about this for a minute. Going forward, like I said, if this is your company, and you might make different decisions based upon not only your personal feelings, but based upon the industry you're in. But one of the things that I saw as an outgrowth of this is the number of kind of alternative work arrangements that came to be. So companies were much more willing to go with hybrid. Some work, some on-site, some at home. Flex schedules, for example, which has been around for a long time. So instead of working, 7 to 4, whatever it is, you can come in 7 o'clock plus or minus an hour and leave at 4 o'clock plus or minus an hour, and we don't care. And again, this doesn't work for all jobs, but to enable folks to have that kind of flexibility. So this, again, it was, I don't want to spend too much time specifically on COVID, but it really caused the conventional thinking to stop and kind of reconsider how do we design work and what are our expectations around, when people are on site and not. Okay, let me move on. Okay, so we talked about the she session a little bit later. We talked about quiet quitting. I think this is more of a generational thing than not. With respect to back in the day, you'd call it no call, no show. So somebody signs on, they come to work, and they come to work for a week or a month or 6 months or whatever it is, and then they just stop showing up. No notice, no call, no anything. They just disappear, like they got abducted by aliens. It's just weird, and
So that would happen
it
to 'em.
really spiked in the last couple to 3 years. Before COVID, we had 3.5% unemployment rate, so it was a buyer's market to the extent that it was very difficult to find skills. When the unemployment rate is very low and it's very, very competitive, it's much more difficult for on the employer side to find skills. When unemployment is high, like it was after COVID, when it jumped up to 14%, okay, obviously the reverse is true. So, people are having difficulty finding work because of the jobs that went away because of COVID. Now, it's come back down. You'll notice that from spring to end of 2020, it less than halved from 14.7 to 6.7, and then 3.9% at the end of 2021. And then fast forward, because I looked a couple of weeks ago, it's around 4%. Does anybody remember from their econ class what full employment is? With respect to what unemployment rate is considered to be full employment? Anybody remember that?
5%?
It's about 3%.
Oh.
And so the presumption is at any point in time, there will be people entering the workforce, there will be people leaving the workforce, there will be people taking time out of the workforce, maybe because of family reasons, maybe because of military service, maybe because of health reasons, any number of reasons, or they just quit or they're relocating or whatever. So 3% is about the threshold of the kind of normal full employment. So if you've got unemployment as low as 3%, you're essentially firing on all 8 cylinders from an economic perspective. So it's amazing we've gone from that. Go back up a couple slides. 3.5% before COVID, spiked pretty dramatically, come back down pretty dramatically, down back to about 4%. So we're a little bit shy of full employment, but still pretty low. Laura, did you have
Oh, all right, 4%?
I have a question about where that 3% comes from. Is that just counting people who have applied and been eligible for unemployment insurance?
The 3% that I talked about being full employment?
Yes.
That 3%?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that includes people that are, like I said, are just entering the workforce, that are just leaving the workforce, that are relocating, that are taking time out of the workforce. They may or may not be applying for unemployment or even be eligible for unemployment. They may be, like I said, you're dropping out of the workforce to attend school for a year or whatever. Okay. So it's a bit of a hypothetical number, but DLS, Department of Labor Statistics, tracks this monthly, and the data is pretty widely available. But go back to the week 1 session when we're talking about long-term workforce planning. Haven't covered it in any detail yet. So one of the things that you're doing as the business owner is thinking about, well, what are my needs? Based upon attrition, based upon projected growth, based upon where the economy is going, do I think my business is going up, they're going to be flat, they're going to be down? And how does that affect my need for employees at any level? Okay. And what am I doing not only to be planful and staying ahead of that, but how do I plan for that with respect to employee development, with respect to when I start recruiting for positions based upon when I think they're going to be needed, based upon what I think is happening in the economy, how it's going to affect the labor market. So, and again, depending on what part of the country you're in and what the predominant industry is. So if you're like in the Dakotas, for example, the oil workers that have the oil industry and Montana, North Dakota, and so forth has been pretty hot property in the last couple to 3 years. So, and those industries pay pretty well. So it's brought in an influx of folks who are working in the oil fields, making pretty good money. But how does that then impact things like the availability of housing? How does that impact, competition for things like the people working in the local store or the local restaurant or the local gas station and whatever? So all of this stuff works in a large model with lots of wheels turning. So again, I just think about that from a perspective. Okay, so changes in the workforce, the demographics, the workforce is getting younger and older at the same time. I'll explain in a minute. Sustainability issues, automation, AI is changing everything. I've seen numbers that said that 50% of jobs in certain fields could be lost to AI. 50%. So think about writers, for example. Scott, you're a tech writer, right? So AI is going to affect your field. It may or may not affect you personally, but there's an example of where AI is going to make a significant impact. Think about the publishing industry, for instance. Okay, there are lots of other industries that are going to be, and lots of other professions that are going to be impacted, but some significantly more than others. This new administration, what's going to happen with the economy and with the tariffs? And tariffs are, and again, this is not a political statement. Tariffs are essentially a tax paid by the buyer of the product. So if you're buying a product that has a tariff attached to it, and that product is 10% or 15%, between you and the seller, the buyer is paying most of that. So there are some businesses. I saw a statistic today that said that international tourism is already down almost $2 billion over the prior year by virtue of people who in other countries are nervous about coming to the U.S. for fear of being picked up in one of these INS deportation raids, for example.
INS, huh?
Okay.
Immigration Naturalization Services.
I'm not weighing in politically. My point is that these are among the broader trends that affect employment. So if your business is affected by tariffs, or if you're in the tourism business and your business is down because of the tariffs or other kind of legal issues, how do you plan for that? Particularly on the people side. Roxy?
Actually, I raised my hand to mention that the second jobs are going to go away at first with AI, like paralegal, like assistants or nurses. Because you said 50%.
Yeah,
so I just
agree. William?
All right, Professor. So a couple examples on tariffs that affect the industry. So one, for my personal industry, in construction, right now we got a lot of finishes that are starting up Q3, Q4 this year. A lot of long lead items, just like flooring, wall protection, items come from Mexico, Canada, and we recently had to let the client know, hey, check out all these now inflations coming from the new tariffs that are going to be implemented soon. So just items like this kind of affecting client-contractor relationship, that's not good for business. And secondly, I just had family come down for a funeral from Canada, and they want to bring back U.S. goods, but they were sharing with me, yeah, we're trying to be careful on items that say made in the U.S. because if we bring that over the border, we're gonna get hit with tariffs on them. It's like, really? Wow. So that just could impact touristy spots that have specific New York or Los Angeles touristy items that foreigners would want to buy, but now don't want to buy because of tariffs. So,
Scott, and then Gabby, and then I need to move on.
As beautiful as the U.S. is, our infrastructure is pretty bad compared to other countries. And in this age of social media, people are able to see how well we developed other countries are, like Japan or Singapore. Just thinking about financially, people are coming here spending so much money when they could spend that money in Thailand or other places that have better tourist attractions. So if I were a travel agency, I would pivot and tell my customers to go to other countries that are more affordable.
And lastly, Gabby.
I just want to say that sometimes the AI conversation, people think of it as a negative thing. Personally, I mean, when AI first came out, our managing partner automatically wanted it integrated into our workforce. And I mean, for us paralegals and us attorneys, people would think, oh, this could take over your job. But the way we've implemented it, it's actually given us the opportunity to bill even more. And as a law firm, I mean, you're billing by the hour. We've used it more as a tool instead of a replacement. So I think certain businesses need to see that it's not just a negative thing.
Oh, for sure. By the way, there was an interesting, just as a quick aside, there was a big deal case. This is about 6 months to a year ago. I don't remember exactly when, but an associate attorney used AI to write a brief.
And in the metadata,
included some references that were in fact fictitious.
Yeah,
they were hallucinations of the AI, and the attorney wasn't smart enough to check them and got called out on it and lost his or her job as a result. So it was
like I said, tool but not replacement.
Yes. Okay. One last comment, and then I need to move on. Alexa.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, working in export, the tariffs are gonna negatively impact our business a lot. There's a lot of items now that we can't sell to our distributors because we're just going to end up losing money on it. And a lot of these items that we can't sell anymore were our top sellers. So it's not only negatively affecting our business, but our distributors' business as well overseas.
All right. Like I said, the last point I want to make on this, and I need to move on. You can't hire and fire people like turning on and off a faucet. Okay, and the more specific the job, the higher level the job, the more rare the job. Okay, it can take months to find people. Okay, and people are not a commodity. Now, if you're talking about minimum wage laborers, that might be one thing. But if you're talking about a skilled accountant or an engineer or a marketer, okay, particularly one that's had, some significant experience with your company, you want to retain those folks. Okay. Conversely, if you anticipate growth, okay, you need to be thinking about what's the lead time associated with how am I going to find that person? And the higher level, the more skilled, the more specialized the person is, the longer it's going to take you to find that person. So think about those internal dynamics. Think about these external dynamics with respect to COVID and the ghosting and all of the demographic trends that we were just talking about. Okay, you got to be thinking long term, partnering with your HR shop to say how are we going to staff this organization? How are we going to keep the good ones? And to the extent that the business is growing, how are we going to staff up timely? Like my Harbor Freight Tools example from last week. If, on the other hand, the business is being negatively impacted, what can I do to make certain that I don't lose my highly skilled, highly tenured employees? So if the business takes a 20% drop, okay, you probably, you don't want to do an across-the-board 20% headcount reduction, because when the business bounces back, which you saw in those numbers with COVID, you're not going to get those people back. So you're going to be thinking about, what kinds of things can I do to soften the blow? Where else can I cut costs to make certain that I'm retaining the core competence of my organization, our expertise? So I'll say this for the fourth time tonight and for the 400 more times before the end of the 8 weeks. I want you to be thinking like the CEO, like the business owner. Thinking long term, thinking more strategically about the business, and how do I deal with these disruptions? And COVID certainly was a disruption with a capital D. Okay. We talked about younger and older. I mean, the young generation now is a significantly larger cohort than boomers, which I am. And yet people in my cohort, the boomer cohort, are working longer. I can remember when I was 30-something, the the projections were that, oh, everybody's going to be retired by age 55. Well, there's not only would the economy not allow for that, but the individual income streams and so forth didn't work that out. But you'll notice from 2012 to 2022, fastest growing age group for workers 55 and over. So there's an awful lot of folks who are in my generation who are staying in the workforce longer than they would have anticipated. So again, another one of those demographics to consider. The 25 to 44-year-old group will increase its numbers only slightly. So this share of the total workforce will fall. Young workers between the ages 16 and 24 will actually be fewer in number. Interesting demographics. And we, the United States, along with some other countries, and when I say the West, I'm including Japan, even though geographically it's not in the West, our birth rate has fallen below replacement level. So, there's interesting demographic criteria thinking long term, how that affects the workforce. I'm not going to get into the cohort thing. There's too much, I think, been made of that, of the difference between the Gen Z and millennials, et cetera. Careers are longer, increased retirements. So think about longevity. So as our health gets better and people are living longer, not only what's that going to do to things like Social Security, but what's that going to do with, when people, gee, if I'm healthy and I'm 65, why would I want to retire if I like what I'm doing? So there are going to be those impacts. Okay. Diversity, rapid change in the last several decades in particular, on all counts, gender, ethnicity, race, sexual preference, all that kind of stuff. Female employment on the rise. There is still that wage gap that somebody mentioned. Women make about 80 cents to the dollar for men, so there's still an issue there. The gap is closing, but there's still a significant gap. The working from home phenomenon introduced by COVID is impacting alternative work arrangements, as I mentioned earlier. Also outsourcing, offshoring, using temporary labor, for example. These are all significant changes in the workforce. Sustainability. So, what are employers doing to make jobs more sustainable, to keep employees? The baby bust I just talked about a minute ago. I'm going to skip through some of this stuff in the interest of time. This is an interesting one to ponder depending upon what kind of work you do and to what extent AI is going to encroach on the kind of work you do. Okay, we've kind of done this in the discussion versus. Okay, let's see.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a good time to take a break because we're gonna change gears altogether and go from trends into the legal stuff. So I've got 7:12. Why don't you come back? Take about 9 minutes. Come back about 7:20, give or take a little bit, and we'll get rolling again.
I gotta take a break too, guys. I'll be back shortly. How do I get rid of this?
Okay, another minute or so, we'll get rolling again. Everybody back? Everybody back?
Yep.
Everybody back?
Yep.
Screen share.
Everybody back? Yep.
Screen share.
Yep.
There we go. All right, everybody see that? The slide? Okay, so see that? I've just selected some things. There's a whole bunch more. There's both the federal and the state law, but level. But even for those of you who aren't in HR, which is the vast majority of it, vast majority of you, you need to understand some of these things that are federal law or state law. Okay, not just best practice, not the ethical thing to do, but what's legally required. Okay, so at the very least, if you take a risk mitigation perspective, you and your head of HR, whoever that is, need to make certain that you and your employees, your managers in particular, are aware of what the legal requirements are so you don't get yourself in a jam. You don't put yourself in a position that can get yourself either sued in a tort action or fined and sanctioned by some government agency like the DFEH, Department of Fair Employment and Housing in the state of California, or the EEOC, or the Department of Labor, or whatever. So some of these you probably knew about, even if you didn't know the details. And so I'm just going to run down through them, and they're in no particular order, but one of the biggies is NLRA, National Labor Relations Act. It goes back to 1935. This is the federal law that made unions lawful and made the right to unionize federal law. Okay, and there's been a lot gone forward since then, a lot of history prior to that, but unionization, by the way, has gone way down from a high in the 50s to I'll find out the numbers, but it's considerably less than half of what it was in the 1950s, 60 years ago or so. And moreover, the mix has shifted. So it used to think of auto workers and carpenters and construction trades and Teamsters and the like. And although the Teamsters as a union is still around and strong, the shift has gone away from private sector to public sector. So police unions, teachers unions, public sector unions, and so forth are the overwhelmingly dominant force in the labor movement today, unlike industrial workers in decades past. Title VII of the 64 Civil Rights Act, this was landmark. And then, by the way, there's earlier legislation that goes back to the 19th century. There's a Civil Rights Act of 1871, so this is, it goes back that far. But the Civil Rights Act of 64 is the one that put in place the federal legislation that says you can't discriminate on the basis of race, age, sex, gender, blah, 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 blah. And the list is expanded both at the federal level and at the state level. But that's the biggie. And that's the one that's kind of the cornerstone of the anti-discrimination laws at the federal level. So executive order, which is what EO stands for, 11246, was signed by Lyndon Johnson, who was president. And this is the executive order that said for federal contractors that you must be taking affirmative action to make certain that your hiring practices are representative of the workforce at large. Okay. And the OFCCP, Office of Federal Contract Compliance, is the federal agency that administers this. Okay. And absent this, contractors or other employers could kind of do what they will as long as they weren't quote, discriminatory. But the executive order says you have to be more than just being non-discriminatory. You have to take affirmative action to make certain that underrepresented groups are being hired in disproportionate numbers to approach parity in the workforce. Okay. So the Equal Pay Act in 1963 was the one of the acts, not the only ones that legislated that women need to be paid the same as men for doing the same job. There's lots of history. There's current history, for that matter, that shows that women are still not being paid the same as men in the same roles, even though it's federal law. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act in 2009 was a more recent federal kind of addendum. But again, the federal law says that if you've got a particular job, I don't care if it's an engineer, an accountant, or a machinist, and you have two people doing the same job, one's a man, one's a woman, you better be paying them the same. Common sense, you'd think, but not so common. There we go. So the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, and there is a term used called reasonable accommodation. Anyone besides the HR folks, anyone heard that term at all? A couple of you have. Okay. What it says is that you have to have a job description that includes the physical components of the job. So lifting or walking or standing for extended hours, whatever those physical issues are. And you must accept a person with a disability if you can make a reasonable accommodation. So let's say you have somebody who's sight impaired, not blind, but sight impaired. So maybe it's just a matter of you buy a much larger monitor with a higher resolution, and they can enlarge the text on the screen, and that can accommodate them, as a for instance. Or you have somebody that has a color blindness, and there's some things that you could have them do that wouldn't matter. Now you couldn't have them be an electrician, perhaps, because of the black, white, red, green wires and so forth, and you got to get that right. But to the extent that you can make a reasonable accommodation. So that reasonable accommodation might be a wheelchair ramp, just to enable them to be accessible to their workplace. Okay? And you must go through, if a person declares themselves with a disability, federal law requires that you go through this accommodation discussion with the affected employee to say, well, what does the job require? What is it that you don't have, or what issue do you have that would prevent you from doing this job? And is there a reasonable accommodation that we can make to enable you to do that job? Okay, so you can't just reject people out of hand that says, well, okay, you can't work here because your wheelchair won't go over the threshold of the building. When you could make a very easy, very inexpensive accommodation. You don't have to spend $50,000 putting in an elevator. Maybe it's just a matter of taking their workstation and moving it from the second floor to the first floor. That kind of thing. Okay. So ADEA, Age Discrimination in Employment Act. This is protects people from ages 40 to 65. So if you're under 40 or if you're over 65, like I am, you're not covered. It only affects people in that 25-year time span. ERISA, Income Retirement and something Security Act. This is the federal legislation that guides retirement plans. So prior to ERISA, for example, there was no vesting requirement. So you could work if your retirement plan had a 20-year vesting period and you worked 19 years and 11 months and then you quit or you got fired, you were SOL.
Straight out of luck.
Term that I won't define. But okay.
Well, I defined it for you.
Okay. So there's a whole bunch of other things within ERISA that governs employment plans. So if you have any kind of qualified plan, including not limited 401ks, pension plans, etc., it's overseen by ERISA. Okay. Family and Medical Leave Act. There is a federal version and a state version. And this is the law that requires employers to provide up to 12 weeks of leave for certain conditions, like to care for a sick parent or child, or bringing home a newborn or an adopted child. There's some other criteria. And by the way, these laws, federal and state, have different thresholds for application. So most of them are like 50 employees and above. So if your business is 3 pizza shops and you've got 12 employees, you're not covered by an awful lot of these. Some of them, if you have any employee, even one, it's covered. And I didn't want to get into the weeds with that. You don't need to remember that. Just presume that all of these things apply to all your businesses. Okay. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Again, there is a state version versus a federal version. Federal version goes back to 1970. This is the law that says you must have guards around certain kinds of machines. You must have MSDS, material safety data sheets. If you're working with hazardous chemicals, you must have respiratory respirators or PPE, personal protective equipment with certain kinds of dangerous occupations, etc. So it's oriented toward worker safety. Okay. And then ACA is the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, federal legislation that went in place in 2018. And this is the law that I referenced earlier when we were talking about Walmart. The federal law says that if you're an employer of 50 or more, you must provide health insurance to your full-time employees. And defined in the law is 32 hours a week. I mentioned earlier that Walmart has a significant portion of part-time employees, and one of the reasons is that so that Walmart doesn't have to provide benefits as long as they keep them under that 30-hour week threshold. Okay. So those are some key ones. Okay, those were federal. So state laws, and again, the DFEH, Department of Fair Employment and Housing, is the. Let me back up. In the federal laws, some of them are regulated by the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Some of them are administered or enforced by the Department of Labor. Some of them are enforced by OFCCP. And those are the 3 primary federal agencies that oversee this stuff. So the EEOC, for example, if you file a claim against your employer claiming that they discriminated against you because you're in a protected class, whatever that is, or multiple protected classes, if you're in by virtue of race or gender, or ethnicity, or nationality, you could be in multiple classes. The EEOC is the federal organization to whom you would make the complaint, and those would be the ones that would decide, well, is there enough merit in this case that we would pursue it against the employer for damages? Okay. And by the way, with respect to damages, going back to the risk mitigation, so you not only want to be compliant for all the normal ethical reasons, but some of these laws, and I deliberately didn't get into the ins and outs of the particular laws, most of these laws have a compensatory provision, which says that, all right, if you the employer, took some unlawful action and caused a person to lose their job for 6 months, and then they filed a claim, and as a result of the claim, they got reinstated, the compensatory piece would be those back wages that they missed. That's very different than punitive damages. So for those of you who took a business law class and talking about the difference between a tort claim, tort claims allow for punitive damages. And then it's oftentimes up to a judge or a jury that says, well, all right, Mr. Employer, you not only did a bad thing, but you did it in a really nasty way. And you're not only going to pay that person back pay, but you're going to pay big time wages, punitive wages on top of the compensatory wages. And that's where the big money is. William?
Professor, I just wanted to add on some details with the OSHA federal requirements as it's deemed to my personal industry. With OSHA, there are 2, depends on the project, required certifications that may be. It's the OSHA 10 and OSHA 30.
Yeah, the
one being 10 hour, for entry level, one being 30 for like more supervisor roles.
Right.
And yeah, in some cases of healthcare projects, there are 100% required for every single person on site to have an OSHA therapy, which could be expensive.
Yeah. Okay. And by the way, also in some of the, and don't hold me to this, I think it's the ADEA, either the ADEA or the ADA, I don't remember which one, and they're very different. One is the Americans with Disabilities Act, the other one is Age Discrimination and Employment Act, so they're focused very differently. One of those two offers punitive damages. So again, if you think about this only from a risk mitigation perspective, we want to make certain that we're not only compliant, but we're not doing something stupid that's going to cost us a ton of money. Okay. Moving into some of the state laws, and again, DFEH is the primary. There is a State Department of Labor and an IWC, Industrial Welfare Commission, that administers and enforces some of this stuff, but DFEH is the main one. So workers' compensation, this is a state-only program. It's not a federal program. It's different from state to state, but I think 49 out of the 50 states have obligatory workers' comp insurance. Anyone familiar with the term XMOD?
Nope.
Okay. You all presumably drive, and you all have car insurance, right? Okay. And you're probably familiar with the assigned risk pool. Anyone heard that term? If you've been a good driver, you may not have heard about it. But the assigned risk pool, in the state of California, if you own a vehicle, it must be insured by state law with certain minimum liability coverage and so forth. If you've been a bad driver and you've had chargeable accidents, you've had too many citations, or you've had a drunk driving or DWI, chances are your insurance company has dropped you from coverage. And so now you are assigned to this assigned risk pool. It is a state-funded organization, so they provide you the insurance, but it's minimal coverage for a really high premium because you've shown yourself to be a poor risk. Okay. Workers' comp works the same way. You can buy insured plans through various insurance companies, or if you've been a bad actor, you can be in the state assigned risk pool. Okay. So coming back to XMOD, every industry has a benchmark around what's the frequency of injury and what's the severity of injury. So construction, like in Williams' business, it has a much higher XMOD because it's the construction industry has lots of accidents and they tend to be more severe than, let's say, a software firm where you got people working in the office where it's near zero. So an XMOD is industry calibrated, and so if you're at 1.0, you're right at the industry average. If you're below 1.0, like 0.9, you have a lower accident rate than competitors in your industry, and you get a much lower insurance rate. If you're above 1.0, your insurance rate goes up pretty dramatically, and it's nonlinear. So I mentioned week one that I did some work for a restaurant franchisee that had the 50 El Pollo Locos and the 20 Denny's and so on and so forth. Their XMOD went to about 1.4, and as a consequence of some poor practices, their workers' comp insurance was costing them $2 million a year.
Whoa!
It was insane. So again, if you think about a risk mitigation perspective, operating a safe workplace is just smart with respect to avoiding insurance costs, and plus the costs associated with the permanent or partial disability, etc. I've already gotten too much in the weeds, more than I wanted to. But anyway, workers' comp is a state law that all employers must provide, and it can be pretty expensive if you're not behaving well. State disability is, by the way, is the only one on here that is, believe it or not, is employee paid. So you pay 1% of your income up to, I think it's $31,000. It's a fairly low number, and that funds the state disability fund. So if you're disabled, whether it's not, this would be a non-work related injury, let's just say you have pneumonia or you had a car accident, the state disability insurance covers that benefit. CAFRA is the California Family Rights Act. It's similar to FEMLA, the federal law that provides leaves. PDLL, Pregnancy Disability Leave Law. So for women who are pregnant, they have to be given leave. Doesn't have to be paid, but they have to be granted. SB 1343. All of you, let me ask you a question. Has anybody not, through their employer, had to go through mandatory sexual harassment training in the last 2 years? Just one, Maren? Okay. It's a state law that says managers have to go through it every year. I think it's every year, and employees have to go through it every 2 years in the state. I just had to do it for CSU. Take the online course, and I have to take it every couple of years. Even though the class is virtual, I still have to go through the process. Jennifer, do you have a question or a comment?
No, just because you did mention the sexual harassment one. I work with kids, and so because of California, our state dictates that we have to do the mandated reporter training in terms of child abuse to recognize.
Oh yeah, sure.
That one's also required.
Being a designated reporter and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So unless you're in HR, most of you won't bump into these things, but you need to be at least superficially aware of them so that somebody in your business is paying attention to this stuff so you don't get yourself in a jam. Maren?
Yeah, so for track and field at Long Beach, we had to not only do the course, but we had to attend a Title IX training, like in-person training as well.
Yeah, Title IX is also part of the
U.S.
64
Department.
Civil Rights Act.
Oh.
And I mentioned Title VII, which is we'll go back here. Title VII, and Title IX is the one that she was mentioning that's specific to educational institutions. Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time with this. This is something you're not likely to bump into unless either A, you're in HR, or B, you're working for a company that doesn't have its act together and is doing stupid stuff. Okay. And by the way, these claims can not only be expensive, just the cost. Anybody know I don't know this probably isn't current anymore, but if somebody makes a claim, a discrimination claim, a wrongful termination claim, something of that sort, and it goes to court, so now you got to litigate it. Anyone have a guess what it costs just to litigate it?
A lot.
$25,000 if your rates will go up for your workers' comp too.
Usually it's not covered by workers' comp. It could be, but an otherwise employment-related claim is typically $50,000 to $100,000 just to litigate it, just in legal costs. Never mind all the discovery and all the other stuff that you got to go through and the distraction. So trust me, you don't want to go through this. That same franchisee that I was mentioning, they weren't doing a good job with their timekeeping. And in California, the law is very explicit with respect to requirements for non-exempt employees to punch in, to punch out, and the meal periods and rest breaks. Okay, and if you're not providing those, okay, and the state does an audit and discovers that you're not compliant, okay, there is you ready for this? A 3-year look back. So you not only have to go back and show the time records for all those employees back for the 3 years and pay them any compensatory time that you didn't pay them, like for a missed lunch period or whatever, okay? But there are fines associated with each infraction, and even at $25 or $50 per times, let's say 200 employees, times 250 days a year, times 3 years, it can amount to big money. Big money. The guy that owned the franchisee coincidentally owned a car wash.
Oh, good for him.
Car washes, by the way, are
small business owner.
Targeted by the state agency just because they do such a bad job of this. And he ended up having to pay, I don't know what the number was, this happened after I left, but he ended up having to pay something like something between $200,000 and $300,000 in back pay and penalties because of their poor record keeping around time and attendance. Jeannie?
real quick, it's just that my work is currently, well, it's already gone through a class action lawsuit. So what they're having us do is work Saturdays to get holidays off, like the day after Thanksgiving or whatever.
Yeah.
It ended up costing them about $750,000 by when all said and done. And it only took 5 employees to start the class action lawsuit. So in California, it's a big issue.
Yeah, California, it's worse. And I should have put it on the slide. California has a law that's been in effect for about 10 years. Now, there's been some recent administrative agency and court cases that have pared that back a little bit. Has anyone heard the term PAGA?
No.
Be surprised anyone. People's Attorney General Act. Okay. You don't need to write that down or remember, except, okay, if I, as an employee, go into my employer and find that there's some technical violation. For example, all of you, if you go into your lunchroom or locker room, whatever it is, depending upon what kind of work environment you have, there's probably a sheet on the wall that's about 2 feet wide and about 3 feet tall, and a color. It might be yellow or blue or green, depending on the industry, with about 6-point font. Okay. Of all the nitty-gritty details around labor law. Everybody familiar with that poster you've seen in your workplace? Okay. If you don't have the current poster up, displayed prominently in a place that employees frequent, like a lunchroom, that's a violation. Okay. So I'm the employee, and I turn that in as a complaint to the Department of Labor in the state, and the state investigates and finds out not only that, but a bunch of other stuff that's out of compliance. Okay, and they fine the employer, $100,000. Well, because I'm the one who turned it in, and I'm essentially substituting for the Attorney General, I get, and I think it's 20% of the fine.
Whoa!
Like a bounty.
That's great.
So the law in California is essentially incentivizing your employees to rat you out for some technical violation of a labor law, and they can enrich themselves in the process. There are also attorneys, unethical attorneys, that will troll employees, in shopping malls and so forth, and said, well, hey, go in and check this out, and to the extent that there are issues, and then going back to Jeannie's point, then they'll find out, okay, well, give me 3 or 4 other employees, and they'll put together a small group, and then there's a legal process that this goes through. But to the extent that the attorney can then get it certified as a class action, now you have these damages for the entire class, not just for the individual. And not only is the attorney making out, but the person who made the initial claim. So under the guise of no good deed shall go unpunished, you need to be paying attention to this stuff, like I said, at the very least, just to keep yourself out of water. Okay. Questions or comments about that before we move on? This is full of stuff, but important stuff. Go ahead, John.
I was going to ask Professor, so what are the repercussions of retaliation from the employer? Like, if you were to do that, like you mentioned, kind of report, hey, this is out of compliance, get a, does that information, is that sealed, or does your employer actually see you reported them? Because, our PowerPoint, this, kind of one of the data points that some of the our lecture and our book kind of covered was that retaliation was probably one of the number one reasons why employees suffer.
But particularly in workers' comp. So, for example, if somebody goes out on a workers' comp leave for some injury and they're out on leave, and the employer fires them, terminates them, okay. There is kind of a prima facie conclusion that the employer is taking a retaliatory action for this person filing a workers' comp claim. And it's called a 132A because that's the labor code section. So a 132A claim, retaliation claim, again, has punitive damages awarded potential in addition to the compensatory damages. So any kind of retaliation for any kind of legal action, including but not limited to workers' comp, can land you in real hot water. So one of the prudent thing that most employers do, particularly with respect to workers' comp claims, even if you know it's a bogus claim, you know, the guy is complaining about, oh, you know, I threw my back out, I can't work, and so on and so forth, even though you have video of him the following week at the bowling alley, right? It doesn't matter. Literally, this has happened. I'm not making that up.
Really? Wow.
A retaliation claim, like I said, is makes you liable to punitive damages. So the vast majority of employers are smart enough to say that if somebody goes out on a workers' comp claim, yes, you're going to monitor them. You might even pay an investigator if you're convinced this is a fraudulent claim. But it's a high risk strategy with respect to a 132A claim. So most employers just leave it alone. Jeannie and then Natasha.
Sorry, real wild. With the class action I told you about my work, it was a $750,000 claim. The lawyers got $250,000, and each of the whistleblowers got $15,000. So it's just kind of like a scam, kind of, really, if you get the right lawyer.
It can be, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And by the way, the lawyers will typically take these on a contingency basis, so they don't get paid unless they win. But depending upon the case and the size of the case and how many people in class action, blah 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 blah. But 30%, 40% of that money goes to pay the attorneys. For the winning party, and even in arbitrated claims, much less litigated claims, again, no good deed shall go unpunished. That even if you win on the employer side, you're not able to recover in most cases, you're not able to recover your costs, your legal costs from the losing party. So being smart and avoiding this in the first place is the smart way to go. Natasha?
You answered part of my question, but I wanted to find out, obviously, with these class action suits, how much do the lawyers make? So that was part of my question. The other part was, to my understanding, the people that get paid the most are the lawyers and whoever got the class action suit started, and then everyone else kind of gets pennies on the dollar. Is that true, how that works? Or, I mean, what exactly is the process for that, and how would one go about starting a class action suit?
Generally, that's true. Okay, and again, there's a lot of variability here. But think about this: if you're an attorney and you're putting in a fair amount of time and effort on the front end on a contingency basis, right? So you don't even have a retainer, much less are you being paid for any of the work that goes along. So you're making a calculated risk that, hey, I think this is a winnable case, and I think we can get $10 million or whatever the heck the number is, depending upon the nature of the claim, how many people are involved. Is it just 2 or 3 claimants? Is it certified as a class? As an attorney, as a plaintiff's attorney, you wanted to get certified as a class because now you have everybody in the class that's going to participate in this, and so it's a much larger settlement. So if you're a plaintiff's attorney and you're doing this on a contingent basis, you're making an assessment about, well, how winnable is this case and how big a buck's can you get? And the more winnable it is and the bigger the bucks, the more aggressive you're going to be. Okay.
There are cases where these class action suits aren't won, and if they aren't, how is the attorney paid if they don't win the case? Do they get paid anything at all?
Nope.
Okay.
Zero. That's what I said. So there's a significant risk on the attorney's part. And that's why if the case isn't solid, and or if the damages aren't enough to make it worth the effort, they're not going to take the case. So if you got fired and you believe that you were fired for some discriminatory reason, and you went to a plaintiff's attorney and just says, "Well, I think I got fired for a discriminatory reason," you're not only going to make a claim that says, "Well, they violated Title VII or some other law," but you're also going to throw in the kitchen sink and said, well, they violated the duty of fair duty. There's 2 or 3 other causes of actions that are tort claims that would be in a wrongful discharge claim. That opens up the possibility of a much larger settlement. So you may not win on the merits of this cause of action, but you might win on this cause of action. So it's a even in the workers' comp realm, it's a contingency basis. So in workers' comp, good news, bad news. On the employer side, the good news is, let's say, and this is horrible, I don't want to shock anybody, but let's say something happens in your manufacturing site and somebody, as a result, loses an arm. Horrible, life-changing injury, right? So you know that they're going to be permanently disabled. Maybe not totally disabled, but at least partially disabled. In the workers' comp system, there is literally a table that says, okay, for the loss of a digit on a finger, it's worth, and I don't know what the number is, but let's just say it's $1,000. If I lose two bones in my finger, it's $2,000. If I lose the whole finger, it's $3,000. If I lose the hand, it's $10,000. If I lose the arm, it's $25,000. Whatever it is. So the good news on the employer part is that your damages are limited. Okay? Even in a wrongful death case, somebody loses their life, and an explosion or fire, and somebody loses. I think I'm not current on this, but the last time I looked, and it's been years, frankly, it was only like $100,000 on workers' comp. So your liability is limited. Now, that's not true in the civil courts with respect to negligence or other tort claims that can be levied against the employer that says, well, not only did they get this workers' comp thing, but because of the employer's negligence or repeated unfair practices, and going back to William's comment, if they've been cited by OSHA several times, there might be an additional fine by OSHA, so forth. So, like I said, it can be really expensive. So, I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm not suggesting also that too many HR departments are so risk averse that they don't allow, their counsel to their employers is such that always take the safest route, which may not be ultimately the right answer. I mentioned last week, if you've got a bad employee, a toxic employee, find some way to fire them, and the sooner the better. And your risk is much lower, even if there is some element of that says, well, if we fire them and they're in a protected class, we now have this potential exposure of some claim being made that says they were fired for some discriminatory reason as opposed to being fired for just being an asshole that pisses everybody off. Okay. So I'm getting ahead of myself here, but the common way around that is to offer some kind of consideration, that's a legal term, that says, all right, if I give you X, and it's always monetary, so, an extra 4 weeks of pay or $10,000 or whatever the number is, depending upon the level of physician, how long they've been there, blah, 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 blah. But in exchange for that consideration, you, the aggrieved employee, then are signing a waiver and a release that says, I accept this as a complete and total settlement, and I promise never to make another legal claim or sue you or other kind of administrative claim. So it's a buyout, basically. So depending upon how badly you want to get rid of this person, depending upon what you gauge your legal exposure to be, in my experience, you can almost always negotiate a settlement that the person will not only promise not to sue you, but there's also typically not only the whole harmless stuff, but the non-disclosure features that says, they're also obliged not to disclose the settlement. And then you sign it and you're done. You pay them the money and they go away. So, anyway, it's a case by case. Kylie and then Scott.
I just had a quick question regarding that, because I'm wondering how companies are able to, like you said, fire someone and pay this settlement without it seeming like the company is doing something suspicious or wrong on their end. Because like my roommate works for a company where she's been working there for a year, and in that year they've had like 3 or 4 people that have said that they've been let go, but that they paid a huge settlement and signed an NDA, so they were fine with like not lashing out. But I feel like in my head that seems like, what is the company doing, or what are they trying to hide that they're worried about that?
Yeah, that is insane.
Do you think it's more like the company just doesn't want to deal with any type of payment for any lawsuit, and it's not really that they're hiding something. I just feel like it makes them seem suspicious in a way.
It's all over the board. In some cases, they probably did something that they feel would put them at risk.
That is
So this is an easier,
insane.
more practical way to just
Absolutely
we're
insane.
just going to buy our way out of this one. Okay. In an example like you cited, if this is an entry-level position, the person had only been there a year, unless they fired this person for some egregious reason, okay, failure to comply with a sexual harassment request on the part of a crappy manager, for example, okay, and the manager fired her, okay, that's a guaranteed victory for the aggrieved employee. So if the employer found out that somebody did something really stupid like that, the smart thing to do would be, all right, we'll take it on the chin. Let's pay what we need to pay to get rid of this, because otherwise we don't want to litigate this. We don't want the expense. We don't want the exposure. We don't want the publicity. Think about in the Me Too movement. Think about Harvey Weinstein and some of the crap that went on not only with Weinstein but in the employment industry in particular. So that was the way the people bought their silence. But often in all the companies that I've worked for, I've had occasion to buy somebody off, not because of anything that we were afraid of or not proud of. It was more the fact that this person was so agitated and so aggrieved and so litigious and so contentious that we just said, look, $5,000 will make this go away, and we're going to be done with it. Scott?
This happened when I was working at my first job at Western Dental. It was a corporate job, and a lot of they had a very high turnover rate. It was like 80 or 90%. Yeah, and most of the people who were let go, for their performance were I feel like they were forced. They felt forced into signing paperwork, and one of the paperwork that they had to sign was basically like a if once you receive your check, you're not going to sue us for whatever reason. And as I'm growing up, I find out that's very illegal. You're not forced to sign anything, and they can't hold your paycheck to make you sign.
So, and again, it's often a practical matter. The last thing you want to think about this, like I said, this is your money. You're the president of this company. The last thing you want to do is have somebody go away mad, and you give them $5,000 or $10,000 or some settlement, but without being smart enough to have the release. And what do? They drive right down the block, and that $10,000 is the retainer for the employer to go sue you. That's why you would never provide that kind of consideration without being in exchange for a waiver and a release. Okay. Jennifer, and then Roxy.
You reminded me about the PAGA. Our break rooms. I never had them, or I was relatively new, but there was like about a year ago, HR just came over and all three of our break rooms placed the big posters, and so now we realized that maybe they just appeared like one day out of nowhere.
Well, either that or they went to some legal update seminar someplace and realized, oh shit, we're supposed to have these and we don't. We got to fix that. So that happens. And by the way, there's a zillion of those stupid little requirements that your HR department is supposed to be watching on your behalf. That just being an example of one of them. Roxy?
In these days, no matter what, people, they're gonna sue, like, when you fire them, or like even if they get laid off, so they're gonna sue the company or the business anyways. But also HR, sometimes they don't do anything. Even when you complain to them about the bad managers or whoever, they're not doing anything. They don't do any actions,
Well, sometimes they're spineless, sometimes they're powerless. Let me also say something. And this will come as a shock to some of you. There is no law that says you have to be fair. There is no law that says you have to be a good manager. You can be a complete asshole pardon the HR technical term. As long as you don't violate the law and those kinds of things that I was talking about, where you're discriminating about a person because of their age or gender, whatever it is, there's nothing in the law that says you have to be nice. So you can't sue somebody just because they hurt your feelings or they yelled at you. Okay? You have to have a legitimate cause of action specific to a particular law that you're suggesting is violated. Or in the case of wrongful discharge, violation of public policy or some other kind of tort action. So to the extent that in the case that she brought up, it might be that they're spineless. It might be that they're powerless. It might be that the boss said, "Well, look, just leave it alone. Don't go there." Okay. Or it might be that the employee was in fact a jerk, and the boss called him out and said, "Get your act together, or hit the road." And they didn't. The employee didn't, and they got fired. And I fired a few people, not a lot, but I never fired anybody that didn't really deserve it, and I mean really deserve it. Anyway, Lauren, and then there was somebody else had their hand up. Go ahead, Lauren.
What I noticed working in HR was there was an employee who was required to take a drug test, required drug test, and he was making excuses saying he couldn't produce any urine or anything. But under federal regulations, if you refuse to take a drug test, that's still constituted as a positive drug test. But he was kind of saying like, "Oh, that's not right," and saying like, "Oh, like making up excuses and all that." But when labor relations got involved in like deciding whether or not like they wanted to terminate this employee, they were kind of nervous since this employee is transgender and has brought it up to EEO. But I've kind of noticed like the company's like concerns about it when it got brought up with EEO.
Okay, so there's a perfect example. So in California, you can't do random drug testing.
What?
You can do pre-employment drug testing for some jobs, like truck driver and things of that sort. Okay. Aside from that, you have to have probable cause. So if somebody comes into your workplace, particularly in a manufacturing workplace, and their eyes are glassy, their speech is blurred, their balance is such that you have reasonable suspicion to believe that they're either high or drunk or maybe both.
Yeah.
Okay. Under those circumstances, you can require a person, or let's say that they had an accident, work-related accident, maybe on the forklift or something like that. You can, as a result of that, require the person to go take a drug test. And if they refuse, to the point, you can take that as essentially an admission that they were under the influence, and they can be terminated if that's in fact your company policy. And the example that you cited, my best guess would be that, well, we didn't. Our reasonable suspicion with respect to why we would compel this person to take the drug test is a little bit weak. And to the extent that that doesn't fly, and the person wants to then make a subsequent claim that says, well, they forced me to do this because of my sexual orientation or sexual identity kind of thing, then it's somewhat problematic. And they just say, well, all right, we'll err on the side of caution. We won't terminate this person. If they're really a bad employee, they'll give us another reason down the road, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So that's a practical matter, a risk mitigation judgment call that you make that says, well, all right, if we fire this person, what do we think is the likelihood that we'll get some blowback claim, legitimate or not, doesn't matter. And do we want to really deal with that, or do we just live to fight another day? So sometimes it's a practical issue. Okay. One last one. Dina?
Yeah.
Yeah, the drug
Weird
testing
stuff,
reminded
man.
me of like when I want to say during COVID, but at the same time I started working for the organization I work for in summer of 2022, and so that's 2 years technically after we first heard about COVID, and still most jobs at that point, and like for my job, it was a vaccination was a requirement, and anytime there was like a COVID exposure, HR, like nobody would tell you anything specific, but you just get an email from HR with like an authorization to go to urgent care and get COVID tested. And that happened like a few times periodically until they just stopped doing that. But that was pretty interesting in like a specifically COVID era.
Well,
thing.
in particular, I mean, oops. Okay, my screen's froze for a second. Everyone heard the expression "hindsight's 20/20"?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's easy now looking backwards. So what was obvious today certainly wasn't obvious at the time. And remember that when COVID struck, I mean, this was uncharted territory. No one had ever dealt with any of this kind of stuff. And so we were kind of, winging it, making it up as we go. And some employers were, much smarter about it than others, but a lot of them just kind of stumbled and mumbled and kind of muddled through. So the kind of thing that you're talking about, particularly in the early days of COVID, aren't surprising at all. And I'm not defending it, but by the same token, I'm empathetic to the extent that, geez, we've never dealt with this before. We don't frankly know how to handle it. Okay. All right. Shucks, did I darn it? I grabbed the wrong slide deck here. In the remaining time, here we go. Okay, so this is the first half of what would otherwise have been next week with job crafting. So we're shifting gears altogether. So we talked about legal trends, challenges, COVID, some of that kind of stuff. Now I want to talk about, like I said, the core thing that would be for next week is job analysis and job crafting. So I mentioned already there's a whole bunch of good reasons for doing this, because having a job description is really the cornerstone of a bunch of other stuff that we do down the road. So a job analysis is the process by which we look at a job and then write it down with respect to what are the duties, tasks, and responsibilities. Okay. And what are the KSAs? Knowledge, skills, and abilities.
Okay.
So we need to look at what gets done, how it gets done, and in the case of a job spec also, what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to perform that job. Okay. And the more accurate we are, the more detailed we are, the better. Okay. Again, good news, bad news. The good news is if we get it right, it's an extraordinarily useful tool that we use downstream for a bunch of other operations. That's the good news. Okay. The bad news is it's a pain in the butt, and it's a really tedious process to go through to either create them originally, or to revise and update them over time. Now, here's an application, by the way, where AI has been an extraordinary time saver. So you could take a job, let's say accounts payable clerk, and ask ChatGPT or some of the other Gen AI products, give me an example of a job description for a accounts payable clerk, and it'll generate one for you in about a second. So, taking away a couple of hours of analysis and questionnaires and writing and editing and that kind of stuff. So if you can start with a draft document, it's a huge time saver. Marin, that's a big cat. Okay.
What?
So we talked about
Marin, what the heck's going on over there? Yeah, that cat is huge.
Looks like a man-eater.
Yeah. Oh
so
my
we
God.
talked about using it as a cornerstone or a basis for performance appraisal. So if we're evaluating someone's performance, it's performance against the job that they're in. Job evaluation, which is a little different. Job evaluation is the process by which we determine, well, is this a grade 4 or grade 5 or grade 6 in the pay scheme, and what does it get paid? So a job description is needed for that. For career planning, I used the example earlier that you're an accountant 1, and what's the difference between an accountant 1, an accountant 2, an accountant 3, an accountant supervisor, and controller, and so forth. And how do we define each of those jobs? And what are the KSAs required for each of those? So training development, learning development. So going back to sticking with my accounting example, what are the kinds of things that we need to do to enable you to move from accountant 1 to accountant 2 to accountant 3? Okay. What are the skills that you're missing? And how do we deliver those to you? Is it experience? Is it a cross-functional work team? Is it a webinar? Is it a read a book? Is it taking a course? Is it some kind of online learning? Is it some kind of apprenticeship? there's any number of ways that we can accomplish that, but it starts with understanding what's the difference between the job you're in and the job that you're aspiring to. And that's, again, another reason why the job analysis is so critical. Legal, I mentioned ADA, for instance. So does the job description describe the physical components of the job? That you must be capable of lifting, more than 50 pounds and lifting it, above your head, for example, if you're working in a warehouse. Okay. So to the extent that you're going to decline an applicant, is that a BFOQ, a bona fide occupational qualification, and it needs to be in the job description. So selection.
Huh?
So whether this is hiring from the outside or for promoting from the inside, if you're an individual contributor and you're applying to a job in your company for a supervisor job or a manager job, what is the job description for that supervisor manager job for which you're applying? And do you meet the minimum requirements or not? So it's a cornerstone for that. HR planning and workforce planning. So we talked about this last week. Is we're looking forward over a probably minimum of 6 months and probably more like 12 to 24 month kind of time frame. Where are we growing? How fast are we growing? What kinds of positions do we need? And before we go out and hire those positions, we got to design them. We have to denote them. And then work redesign. The best example, I think, is the one that gets into job crafting. Was in that Burt's Bees case, which hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to talk about next week because I think it's a valuable case study to talk about live in class. Natasha?
I'm so glad we're talking about job analysis. I have a question that I'd like to kind of touch on or find out or get some insight on. Within a company, when they do in-house promoting, if you promote, someone from one position to another position, I am very curious as to why they would only give that person, let's say, a $10,000 to $15,000 pay bump versus if they go outside the organization and hire someone else to do that job, they end up paying that person more than the person that they're promoting from within the company. And I don't understand why you offer the person coming from the outside a bigger salary than the person that's already on the inside that obviously has experience within the organization and all of those things.
That sounds
but
scandalous.
They'd rather pay someone from the outside more. I just see that happen at my particular company a lot.
What the heck is going on over there?
To your specific question, I'll make a couple comments. One of which is that the presence or absence of the job description or the job spec is probably independent of the selection and the pay decision they make in terms of inside versus outside. So, to the extent that they're favoring external candidates over internal candidates, I'd have to know more to be able to comment about that. Now, I will say that what a job description does is said these are the minimum requirements. This is the threshold for qualification. So to apply for this job, you must meet these minimum qualifications, and that's whether you're inside or outside. Now, the extent to which you exceed those qualifications often would get reflected in what the new pay rate is, whether you got promoted into that role or whether you got hired from the outside into that role. So first of all, think about the job description as just a threshold. These are the minimum skills, knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required. So you've got to be able to think about a poker game. You've got to be able to ante, right? Those are table stakes. The extent to which you exceed that and ergo are worth more money or a different title depends on the extent to which you exceed it and by how much in here. Okay. Roxy?
They don't have to raise, right? Even when they promote within the company, like within the employees, right?
No. By the way, there's no legal requirement to have a job description or a job spec. Not state, not federal. It might exist in some municipality, someplace I don't know, or maybe in the public sector there's some law that I'm not familiar with, but it's not a legal requirement. It's certainly a good idea, that's certainly best practice, but it's not a legal requirement. There are lots and lots of companies that have been around for a long time, even companies of some size, 100, 200 employees, that don't have any job descriptions. It's kind of silly, but again, there's no requirement. Similarly, other than the the minimum wage laws and stuff that are in the state and the federal laws, there's no legal connection between a pay rate and a job description. So companies can pay whatever they want, and there's no legal requirement to have any kind of pay process or pay system with grades and ranges and all that kind of stuff. So you are free to roll your own. You can negotiate individually with every single person in your company and pay whatever the heck you feel like paying them. And again, there's no legal requirement to do otherwise. Best practice for sure, but not a legal requirement. Does that answer your question, Roxy? Okay. Lauren?
I just wanted to add in a comment from what I noticed and heard from the recruitment team was if you're with a company and you've stayed there and then you leave towards another company, you probably acquire more skills, like learn more about like other functions, and then you return back to your previous company, they're willing to pay you more just because you've like acquired new skills and like they're willing to like match with the job description.
That's pretty common practice, yeah. And again, it depends on where they went, how long they've been gone, what are those incremental skills, and so forth. But there's also and this is just a rule of thumb, most jobs have about a 2 to 3 year maturity curve. So whether it's an entry-level job or mid-level job, it takes a couple, 2 to 3 years for you to be fully proficient and performing at a high level in that job. Okay. After 2 to 3 years, the curve tends to flatten. Okay. So the difference between somebody with 3 years experience versus 5 years experience is much less than somebody with 0 versus 2 or 3. Okay. Now, one of the ramifications for that, this is kind of off-label now. This is not course material. If you've been in your current role for 2-3 years, you've probably got about as much out of that role as you're going to get.
Yeah.
So depending upon what you envision your career arc to be, if you've been in that same role for 3 years and you haven't been promoted, it's probably time to either be actively positioning yourself for promotion or maybe looking for a role outside.
Yeah, I've noticed.
And I'm not trying to tell anybody to leave their company. If it's a good company and you've got a good culture, that's worth a ton, believe me. My point is that after about 3 years, you hit the point of diminishing returns. So from a career management perspective, from your individual perspective, if you've been in your job for 3 years, like I said, it's time to be considering a promotion or looking at another opportunity in another company to keep you on track. Here's a corollary. If you think about me, see if I can. Hold on a second. Let me stop sharing. And let me go to. Oops. Hold on a second. What I'm trying to do. Oh, here we go. Okay. Yes. Hold on.
What are you trying to do, man?
See if I can make this work.
What are you trying to do?
Not very well. Okay.
Bloody hell.
Here's the y-axis, x-axis, right? And here are 3 curves. See those?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is time. 0 to, let's say, 25 years. This is responsibility level. And the point I want to make, much of what affects your career long term is kind of sort of decided in the first 5 years.
Oh.
So if you get on a track, and again, sorry about this. Wait a minute, I got an idea. This might help. Right. Give me a minute here.
Okay.
Let's see if this helps. This is if we were in class, I'd be using the whiteboard.
I know. That's okay.
Okay. You can see line A, line B, and line C. Okay. If you start out on line A, okay, either by virtue of the position that you start in or the rate at which you progress from a, job level 1, level 2, level 3. Okay. The longer you stay on that track, okay, mathematically the difference to jump from track A to track B, the longer you're on track A, the bigger that jump and the harder it is. So an awful lot of what affects your career 20 years out is where you are today. And so you, to the extent that you can, you want to be on as steep a curve as you can get. And the quicker you get on that track C here, the more likely you are 20 years out to be in a higher level, much more highly compensated position. In similar fashion, to the extent that you can go to work for some high-profile company, a really highly regarded company, like a PepsiCo, like an Amazon, so forth, much less like a McKinsey, a marquee company, okay, that carries, regrettably, in some respects, a disproportionate weight or influence as somebody looking at your resume 2 years, 3 years, 4 years out into your career. So much of what sets the stage and sets the angle of that glide path depends on how you manage your career those first 4 or 5 years out of college.
Oh, geez. Pressure's on.
Okay, again, this is off topic. This has nothing to do with the content that's in the materials. But I want to share that with you to the extent that as you think about this as an individual, and similarly, if you're the owner of the company, and you're looking at people that you believe that are fast trackers, that are high pos, high potentials. Okay, you want to start working with those folks early on to get those skills. So if you think that this person could be a general manager, for example, 10 years out, the earlier you identify those high potential folks and the earlier you start that intervention with respect to accelerating the development, the more likely they are to be ready for that role 5 years out or 10 years out that you've envisioned. Yeah. So it works both ways, both at the micro level, at the individual employee level, as well as at the macro level, as you're thinking about your people resources and who's going to run this organization 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and taking a long-term view. Okay, Jennifer.
Oh, when you were talking about job descriptions, I know they're not required, but right now, I guess it's the first time in like 10, maybe 20 years that we're in our organization. We had a consulting company come in and they forced the regular status employees to go through their job description that was linked to that job assessment tool. And I guess they're trying to to alleviate the reclassifications that often get filed, they're trying to like just modify the job description. So that was just interesting.
Well, and sometimes it may be for compliance reasons. Another reason to do it is because you want to reassess from a job evaluation and how are we paying versus market.
Yeah.
So as a result of that analysis, you may decide this is not a grade 6 job. This is a grade 8 job.
And also some of the verbiage was just outdated because it said like top typewriter. It said typewriter or computer, but none of us use typewriter.
Yes. Yeah. I learned to type in high school on a manual typewriter. I don't even know where you'd be lucky to find one in a thrift shop nowadays, I think. Okay. Mohini?
I had a question. Is there a such thing as you could be overqualified for a job?
Yes, but. Okay. And it's a answer that employers will sometimes use in kind of a bogus fashion, that they don't want to hire somebody. And the reason is that if it's, let's say that going back to sticking with my example, we have an opening for an accountant, and you've been an accounting manager, or maybe even a controller in a small company. So are you overqualified? Yes. Could you do the accountant job? Certainly. You've already demonstrated that, earlier in your career. But you're probably making, 10 or 20 or 30% more than what that accounting job is. And so the reason for telling you you're overqualified and we don't want to hire you is not because you couldn't do the job. It's A, we don't want to pay the premium, and or B, even if you're willing to take the lower salary, our guess, speculation is that, well, she's just going to take this job for long enough until she can find that controller job like she used to be using. And so why do we want to waste the time and the money when we don't feel that she'll stick? Because as soon as a controller job comes up sometime, as the economy gets better or whatever, she'll be out of here. So that's the rationale. I'm not necessarily defending that, but that's behind the curtain. That's how things work. That's how those discussions go. Those hiring discussions. Summer?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on, as we're talking about job description, again, I haven't had to deal with HR in almost 10 years now, but being in, friends, family, and all that, some of the things that I hear back is they don't want to do certain work because it's not part of their job description. Or their response is, I'm getting assigned a new role, but yet my pay isn't increasing. So, and I get it, that's anecdotal, it's not everybody's situation, but I'm saying as we navigate through situations like that, management already then has to deal with employees who may not be as productive as we need them to be. And then in the role of HR, supporting those frontline managers and everything else, how do we work alongside those job analysis?
Well, there are at least two elements to your question, and I'll address them both. So in the first one of the common, and this has been best practice for decades, there's usually a line down at the bottom that says, okay, well, let me back up. Classic format for job description is there's a summary, 50 words or whatever it is, very brief overall summary. Someplace in there's going to be KSAs that are required, knowledge, skills, and abilities, education, blah, 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 blah. But the meat of it is the duties, tasks, and responsibilities. And those are typically listed in descending order by order of importance or impact. So the most important part of the job, is number one, the next most important is number two, the next most important number three, et cetera. Okay. And you might have 12 or 15 duties, tasks, and responsibilities. Okay. The bottom one, in most job descriptions, will be, and other duties as assigned. So that's the management catch-all that says, well, we can't possibly think of everything, or even if we could think about it, we're not going to create a job description with 116 duties, tasks, and responsibilities. So we're going to have just kind of this catch-all that other duties as assigned. Now, to the second part of it, if a job is materially changed, significantly changed with added responsibilities, then yeah, it probably does deserve a relook that says, well, is this still the same job or is this a new job? Okay, and a new job that's worth another pay grade or another 10% of whatever. Now, to the extent that you've taken the same job and you've incorporated some, smaller new duty, integrated AI in some of the processes or something of that sort. It's a judgment call with respect to does that go over the line with respect to, well, now we're talking about, a material impact, a material change in the job that would affect a person's reasonable expectation around pay. Okay. So, and again, one of the reasons for doing these job descriptions, that is that now you can compare apples to apples. So as you look at salary survey data, you can show the employee, well, all right, here's your job, here's how it compares to the job in the survey, and here's the mean, the market mean for that role in our geography. And we're a little higher, we're a little bit lower, whatever, but you can rationalize to say, well, we're in the right ballpark. Now, there is always somebody down the street who will pay 10% more. That's just universal. Okay. But it's one of the reasons why you want a job description is to be clear around expectations, and that's part of what the job description does. Gabby?
At our firm, we represent a lot of oil companies, and I've noticed that in the past, I want to say 2 or 3 years, they've moved forward with hiring more consultants than full-time employees. And I was just wondering is that by industry or why is it mostly oil companies? That I've seen in my experience, or when does a company really think that the best decision is to do consultants and not full-time employees?
I think it's fact and situation specific. I mean, when do you do a regular hire versus a temp? Okay, I'm asking that rhetorically. So if you're hiring a consultant, it's typically because you need very specialized expertise that you don't have in-house. Or maybe you have it in-house, but you don't have the bandwidth, the extra capacity at the moment, and you just need some short-term help. You need an extra pair of hands for 3 months. Okay. There are other reasons, but these are just examples of reasons. You're going to pay a premium for that consultant because you're going to pay not only let's just say it's, to make the arithmetic easy, let's just say it's a $100,000 job, which is roughly $50 an hour. Okay. You're going to add, 30 to 50% on that for benefits and burden rate, utilities and all the rest. Okay. So your actual cost as an employer is more like $150, maybe even $200 an hour, actual real cost. Hard dollar, soft dollar. Okay. You're going to pay that consultant, $300 or $400 even. Okay. But that consultant knows that they're there for a very specific time to do a very specific job, and depending upon how the agreement is written or the contract is written, probably with no expectation, much less assurance, that the job will last any longer than the time frame indicated in the agreement. And with little or no, the agreement may specify that, we're only required to give 1 week's notice either way. Either you're leaving us or we're terminating your services. So you're willing and able to pay a premium because it's a very short-term, very specific need that you can't do internally. Or, like I said, you don't want to take on the extra burden of hiring this person if you don't have the reasonable expectation that the need will go on long enough that you would keep them as an employee. Okay, but it's a business decision. It's an economic decision more often than not. There's no legal component or job description component to it. Sean.
Yeah, I just had a quick follow-up on the question Summer had asked. So are there different practices within job analysis for converting like a part-timer or like a freelancer to a full-time position rather than hiring someone entirely new, especially if it's a job different than what they're doing as a freelancer or part-time employee?
Ask it again. I'm not certain I got the gist of your question.
That's fine, but so if there's a role open at a company, is the process for like doing a proper job analysis and hiring the right person, is that different, especially for hiring someone entirely new versus converting someone who was working part-time or in like a freelance position?
The short answer is no. Now, remember that there's no requirement for a job description at all. But the better practice, much less best practice, would be to, if the job is being newly created or a job has been significantly expanded, like in Summer's case, then yes, it probably makes sense to recreate a new job description for this new role. So whether it's new in the incremental sense that it's not replacing something, or it's new because it's taken an old role and expanded it significantly, or if it's just a new role that we've just decided, hey, we needed somebody who does SEO, SEM on our marketing organization. We don't have anybody that does that. So we're going to create this brand new role. We have some things that we think that we need to get done, and we're going to create this job description, and then we're going to use that either to promote or to go hire somebody to go do that role. So now on the individual employee side, and there's also, we'll talk about this in week 7, I think it is, when we talk about motivation. But David McClellan, was an IO psychologist in Harvard. He's dead now, but some of his research goes back as far as the 1940s at least, and up through the 1970s. He was very prolific for a very long time.
Whoa!
But, and we'll talk more about his theories. But one of the key underpinnings is that if you want to improve performance, either individual performance or group performance, the number one thing you can do, not the only thing, but the thing that has the most leverage, is be very clear about expectations. What is it exactly that you need to get done? The outcome, not necessarily the process, but the outcome. Okay. So how somebody goes about doing it is maybe variable. So coming back to the job description, if you have some very specific needs that you need to get done in your organization, to the extent that you can be very clear about expressing those in the job description, and more importantly, to have understanding and agreement on the incumbent, the person who's actually doing the job, just that alone will significantly increase the likelihood that that person will perform in the way that you want. Okay? Think about it the opposite. Have any of you worked in a job where you not only had no job description, but your boss gave you little or no direction and just said, here's your desk or your workstation, go to it? Laura, who else?
Kind of.
Who else has been in that kind of situation? Okay.
Kind of, yeah.
So what did you do? Seriously, what did you do?
Had to figure it out from others.
Laura?
Watched my coworkers and did my best, and it was really not easy.
Kind of fake it till you make it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Alexa, and then Adolfo?
So I've currently been in that situation for almost 2 years now, and it's almost just been expected of me to take on like so much work. I'm just CC'd on all the emails with my bosses, and if they don't get to it first, I get to it, and I've learned to reach out to other teams and departments and try and find my contacts from them and just kind of form my own network and then learn how to do my own job from there.
You might want to start, for those of you who don't have a job description or haven't been given any direction, write your own. I'm curious. Here's what I understand my job to be. And once you have that documented, there's now an excellent opportunity for you to have a conversation with your boss that just says, I want to make certain that we're on the same page with respect to what I think my job is versus what you think my job is.
Okay.
And, I've taken the initiative by writing these things down, and I'd like to have some discussion with you to say, are we on the same page? If I got this wrong, am I doing things that I shouldn't be doing? Are there things that you want me to be doing that you haven't told me that need to be on this sheet? So, and this gets into the development section down the road. We'll talk more about that. Adolfo, and then I'm going to go right to left this time on my screen. Adolfo, and then Jonathan, and then Dimitri.
So I did have a position where there was absolutely no guidance or a job description. I was a grant lead at a school district, so helping manage grant money I looked up job descriptions for other school districts, so positions that were either the same or similar, and that kind of gave me an idea, as well as just creating a network with other individuals that have the same position in their district, and really learning a lot from them. But it was, I remember at the beginning, I spent quite a bit amount of time just doing research on what the responsibilities were for that specific position, and then just learning as much as I could using the web as the very big.
Good. All right, Jonathan and Dimitri, and then we'll wrap up. I noticed that it's 8:45, so it's time. So
Yeah, no, just a quick question, just a quick comment here, Professor. So my problem wasn't so much that I didn't have a job description. Boeing really has them all outlined, from tier level and everything like that, even past kind of like the salary ranges of how much, we're expected to get paid. The problem that I kind of run into is that my job in finance just kind of merges with a lot of, functions within, the company that is Boeing, right? When you're dealing with the matrix organization and a huge international company like Boeing going through mergers and offshoring labor, bringing in offshore. Like the job description just tends to get very gray, very muddy, and it's like it's more of a matter of like learning kind of how to put up your shield up your job description and craft it out and say like this isn't really my responsibility, and that kind of belongs to that function, this function. And so kind of what Alexa was talking about, you find yourself kind of just in a lot of those type of conversations, and reaching out to some of the folks and saying like, hey, can you help this person out and stuff like that. So it tends to be a little tough there sometimes. So.
and in smaller companies where people tend to wear multiple hats, it gets a little trickier, right? But there's still value in writing those things down, not only with respect to being clear about expectations and what you're doing and so forth. Think about it also, again, going from a self-interest perspective. To the extent that you can articulate those in your LinkedIn profile, your resume, you've now expanded your bandwidth with respect to the kinds of things that you can do that make you more marketable, make you more promotable. Okay. Dimitri?
Yeah, in my role in materials engineer at Lockheed Martin here, like some things were not in my description, some things I've just had to infer that we do. And you're right about like this would improve performance if it was more explicit, because some things I only learned later on that, oh, this is what I should have been doing. Okay, that's not great.
Yeah. Okay. One last one. Dita?
Yeah, I mean, it should go unstated, but because we were talking about, minimal to no direction in work, I think the opposite is also really bad because, like, I've dealt with micromanagers, but, like, I wasn't allowed to send an email to, like, a different internal employee without my supervisor approving it, even though my grammar was better than hers. So I think there's, like, a balance between...
Absolutely. Micromanagers are everybody hates them. Okay. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we'll talk a lot more about this next week, and then we're going to get into, not next week, the week after, because we don't have class next week. But I think I've driven home the point that defining the job in as much detail, practically speaking, as you can, is a benefit not only to the person performing the job, but it's to the benefit of the organization. And it's used in all of these things that are up here on the chart. So next week we'll talk, or next time we get together, we'll go through some more of this with respect to how does this get done, how would you do it, etc. A lot of this can be somewhat automated, and like I said, AI has been a huge help with this, even to the extent that you can write down kind of fragments and load it into ChatGPT and say, okay, take this stuff and create a job description. It'll do it about that fast. And you can do this iteratively that says, okay, I've added a couple things, now smooth it out for readability or clarity or whatever it is, and it'll do that. So, like I said, this is just one small example of how AI can be a real time and effort saver in this process. And I think I just want to make certain there isn't anything that. Okay, we'll talk more about this. Between now and the next time we get together, make certain that you review the Burt's Bees case. And also this, it's in the materials here, but this YouTube video that you can see on the screen, it's an interview. Candace, I can't remember her last name. Oh, there it is, right there on this slide. Billups. So it's interesting examples of kind of a self-initiated job crafting, and how somebody will talk about job enlargement, job enrichment. This is a really good kind of interesting YouTube video. So anyway, with that, so I apologize for being 5 minutes over again, but good discussion, good participation
That's
tonight.
all right.
Thank you very much
I got
for
nothing
that.
better to do.
Have a wonderful week off next week. Relax. You still got some assignments, but at least you know your Tuesday night is now free. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. And lastly, like I said, I'm happy to stay over if anybody has any questions or comments. Otherwise, I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Just
All right. Great game, everybody. Great game.
Before you leave, can you also check all the dates and everything for the assignments?
Yeah, I made that note earlier, so I'm going to not only check the dates in Canvas, but I'm also going to make certain that those assignments are unlocked.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Great game.
So yeah, that was my question.
All right. Well, that was nice, huh? All right, guys, I got to take a little break before this tournament starts here. Let's see, I've got about 9 minutes here. All right. It's gotten a little weirdly hot in my room as of late. I don't know what's going on. I'm back. I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. Let me just turn the stream back on here. Here we go. Should be able to see it shortly. Bloody hell. It's not coming online. Can you guys see the stream? None. Yes, you can. Okay, great. It'd be nice if I had a viewer to tell me yes or no, but that's okay. I am like 99% of Twitch streamers with 0 audience. That's okay. It just means I've got to improve my stream. Oh, I forgot to turn the sound on. Hang on, give me a second here. Okay, there we go. Okay, great team I've got here. Great team I've got. Alright, let's go ahead and forfeit at 3:30. Oh, team, get out of the way. Nice. Yep, a great save by me. Yep, another great save by me. How do I ever lose, folks? How do I ever lose? Yep, a great pass to the other team. Another phenomenal save by Biot-Savart. Yep, well, that's what you come to the stream for. My legendary saves. And definitely not my scoring, so I'm not doing a whole lot of that relative to my saving. Thanks. Yep. Great game, lads. Great game. Teammates are bad. Alright, let's get out of here. Yep. Great game, everybody. Man, what a great team I have, huh? Okay, apparently my voice recording was turned off all of a sudden. Don't know why that was ever off. I have that on all the time. You know? Alright, on to the second chance tournament. Oh, what a great team I had, huh? Yep. Dry downtown. Great teammates. Look at that. 182, 140. Yep. Keep up the good work, guys. Yep. Just keep playing Rocket League competitive. Keep wasting everybody's time. Good idea, fellas. Alright. I'll be right back. See if I can make any progress on Rome Remastered after this Rocket League stream is done, so stay tuned if you're interested in that. I gotta say, the Pontus playthrough could be going better. I wasn't expecting, I think where I left it, I'm looking at 4 Egypt, like half and full stacks intermixed. So that's not good. Oh, alright. We're back. Tournament's starting. Alright, everything's back. Here we go. Alright, second chance tournament it is. Oh, what a pinch. I wasn't expecting the ball to bounce like that. My bad. Yep. Thought I could score right there, but... Yep. Oh, aces. Come on, man. Couldn't let me score that one right there. Oh, good job, Hobo. Way to just let it bounce and let him score. That was a really good idea. I'm really glad you did that right there, Hobo. Perfect. Exactly what I wanted to have happen right there. Alright. Alright. That's the end of the tournament. Hope you guys enjoyed the stream. Have a good one. I'm gonna see how well my Rome 1 playthrough of Pontus does in a couple of minutes here, so stick around if you want to watch that. Wow. Didn't feel like scoring right there. Smokey the Don. Yeah, these guys are just way better than us. Yep. Sick bump, Robo. Just what I needed. And you couldn't save it. Alright. Great tournament, everybody. Great tournament. Yep. A lot of talent on this team right here. A lot of talent. Yep. A lot of talent on this team. Yep. A lot of talent on this team, folks. Real nice pinch right there. Yep. A lot of talent on this team. Oh, what a great save by me. And a real clutch demo at that. Oh, F you. And I couldn't score. You guys are terrible. Get me out of here. That's the end of the stream, folks. Get me out of here. I'm done with these garbage teammates. I've had them all day long. All day, without mercy. They've been trash from one team to the next. Get me out of here. Good lord. Well, hope you guys enjoyed the stream. It's been fun. Cool. Alright. Have a good one, everybody.